All right, welcome back to another exciting episode of the Bright Brainz podcast. I'm your host, Isaac, and today we have a special returning guest who needs no introduction from our longtime listeners. His name is Paranoid American, and if you've been with us for a while, you might remember him from episode 45, where we dove deep into a highly controversial topic involving a certain substance that starts with an A and ends with chrome. If you missed that one, I highly recommend checking it out at brightbrainzpod.bsky.social after this episode. Well, today we're shifting gears to explore something equally intriguing: DARPA's potential connection to none other than Taylor Swift. Yes, you heard that right. We're about to venture into some uncharted territory. So, welcome back to the show, Paranoid American. For those who are just now turning in, could you give a brief introduction and tell us about yourself?
Yeah, thanks. It's good to see you again. I had a great conversation last time. This one's going to be just as fun, if not even more so. You can find me at paranoidamerican.com. I've been self-publishing comics, games, music, art, all kinds of stuff for over 12 years now. And I started it while I was working full-time at Disney. I did animation at Disney for 10 years. So while I was working there, I just said, why can't I do what I'm doing at work, but do it about the stuff that I really care about? If I don't want to sell a lunchbox, I want to teach people about MK Ultra and Taylor Swift being a DARPA project. So here we are doing it. I'm living the
All
dream.
right, awesome, man. Definitely. So let's hop into it, man. First, what is DARPA?
So DARPA is basically the R&D branch of the DoD. So any kind of cool new technology that comes out is usually related to DARPA. DARPA is probably, I would say, the public-facing version. I mean, I've got a tinfoil hat squarely on my head, metaphorically, maybe, if not literally, all the time. So DARPA is sort of the public outreach version of this. It's the one that civilians are allowed to know about. It's where I would say they put out their fairly old technology, where it's not like the absolute cutting edge for obvious top secret reasons, right? But this is basically, if you just look at DARPA as the R&D public facing wing of the military, it's got all the cool tech and gadgets and stuff. But again, like maybe 20, 30 years, maybe a full generation behind, I think.
What are some technologies that you've heard about that have been connected to DARPA?
Well, so I actually got interested in this because I was in the Air Force doing tech, and I was just looking around to see what all the other people that I knew were kind of tangentially working on and related to. And there was one in particular that caught, and this is 2001, I think, 2002 at the very latest. And there was a couple. One of them was this camera that would be inside of the cockpit of a fighter jet or, any sort of aircraft that would read your eyes and then be able to determine where your eye was looking and then just automatically steer or even provide, like your aiming, like your missile lock on if you just stared at something long enough. And this, even in 2002, this wasn't really super advanced. What was interesting about it was that they were basically claiming that this had been around since about the 70s. And that one was kind of notable. And that sort of reconfirms a rumor that I've heard in all different avenues before, but also one that just feels right, if you go with your gut, but that whatever we see being released or talked about in any form is probably about a generation behind. So that was one of the really cool ones that I was able to like later confirm, like, oh wow, this really did only get released to the public 30 years later. There was another one at that time that I was just geeking out over because it was a cool idea of a self-repairing minefield. So let's say you put like 100 landmines over a field somewhere and a tank goes through or a dog goes through or a person goes through and they blow up and they take out a few of the other landmines in that area. Well, now you've kind of got a pocket. So if you were trying to get your way through a minefield, you could basically just like try and activate them using dummies or, driving cars off into it or whatever, and eventually clear yourself a path. So self repealing minefield would be that once there's a gap, all the mines are talking to each other and they constantly reconfigure where they're at. They'll move around so that they're always covering the most ideal amount of surface area for any defined coordinates that you kind of give them. So again, this isn't even really like super advanced technology. It's just really kind of cool stuff in the example that DARPA does. And by the way, to DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. That's what it all stands for. But again, just think of it as the R&D wing.
Shout out to our sponsor, Bad Product, the modern lifestyle brand that specializes in streetwear apparel and accessories. Their dedication to values such as self-care promote an optimistic vibe that is sure to spread awareness, and we are always happy to endorse a small business that ultimately shares common beliefs. Go check out Bad Product for yourselves. They stay with multiple collections, great deals, and specials. Simply use our coupon code VAGABARD for 10% off your final purchase. For the best quality, choose the Bad Product. We appreciate the support, and without further ado, please do stay tuned and enjoy the show.
Gotcha. I was actually just going to ask you what did it stand for. But here are some things that I've heard that are connected to DARPA. One thing I've heard is that they have a robot, right? Like an autonomous robot, which shouldn't be that surprising. If you've been following anything involving the military, you know they have robots. But one of these robots they have can like eat to sustain itself. So like let's say it's on the battlefield and it can't, it needs to recharge its battery. It could like eat the flesh of a dead soldier or like, some food it sees laying around and recharge itself.
You added a qualifier there too. You said a dead soldier. Technically, that is not a requirement for this mechanism to function, right? So it might even look to the left and to the right and be like, I am more efficient than the guy to the left, and then just start eating them, right?
Yeah, that is true. I didn't even think about that, man. And then here's one I find really intriguing is they said that they have the ability to send information back in time. So like, let's say something happens, like let's say a close friend of yours gets into a really bad car accident. You could send him an email the day before that car accident telling him, hey, don't drive down this street or whatever. Supposedly that's something that DARPA can do, which that's crazy to me. But what do you think about that one? That's probably like the most outlandish, but
yeah, I wouldn't put it past, especially if you get on like the technicalities, if they're using some kind of quantum computing where they claim to have some sort of entanglement where it almost bypasses the concept of being limited by the speed of light, right? So even if you got fiber optics or like one of the fastest types of conveying information, even if you're sending an electron, down a circuit board, you're essentially being held back by the speed of light and speed of electricity. So the quantum computing could technically, if it goes faster than that, then in the most, technically correct, which I guess is the best way to be correct with that you are beating the speed of light. And I guess that would be that would kind of be time travel. I guess it's like the tiniest baby step in the time travel that you could possibly have. So having those sorts, and the other thing too that it could do is like all this predictive analysis. So AI is pretty ubiquitous now, right? Like you don't even have to really explain it to your parents or grandparents, I don't think, because they've already seen at least a few articles on it in very tangible ways that aren't completely abstract. So some of those is that if you've got a robot that's going into a volatile area, right, and it can't see around that corner, but it can do 20,000, predictive analysis on what might be behind that corner and start collapsing those functions into whatever makes the most sense. And if you can predict well enough with enough consistency, as long as you can predict better than 50%, better than a flip of a coin, then it's more efficient than guessing, right? So from there, if you just keep moving forward, I would almost say it would be indistinguishable from time travel if you could predict, with a very high amount of accuracy what was going to happen constantly. I mean, and I guess we're talking about time travel of information, not necessarily of like, time cop or like sending someone Terminator or anything. That's kind of on a different playing field. I also wanted to point out too, just to go with sort of what I was saying before, the robot you described that can consume organic mass and use that for its fuel. It's the EATR, and what DARPA calls it is the plant eating robot, because they're very specific of like, oh no, it would only eat plants, but really it's just any organic biomass that it could consume that would give it all of this, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. The whole AI and robots eating matter. I mean, that just sounds like a recipe for disaster. It
Well, and
feels
I
like,
think we're there, man. It's almost like cloning, where like you could technically clone anything now. It's just that the
Mhm.
ethics and the morals and sometimes the law are the only thing that holds you back. But if you were to take a historical analysis of the US military, they have never really adhered to any three of those. They don't adhere to morals or ethics, or sort of like the cultural guy. And there's really no law for them, right? Like they operate
Yeah.
outside the law. They're the military and police, which are like the line between the two continues to blur more and more as we go on. And it's literally their role is to be the only state sanctioned use of violence. There's no one
Yeah.
else that's really allowed to use violence. Boxing and stuff like that, where people sign waivers aside, but this is the only time the state's allowed to use violence on you. So yeah, they don't have the same rules. So when they say a plant eating robot, I guess I've trained myself. Maybe it's like a little black pilled, but that's people eating robot. That doesn't have to be plant eating
Yeah.
robot. It's anything eating robot.
Exactly. All they have to do is like flip a switch or change a line of code in that algorithm, and from plant eating to carnivore, that's all it is. I mean, the movie Terminator was already scary, a relentless robot. But imagine, Arnold Schwarzenegger chasing after you and ripping your flesh off your body and eating it. I mean, that's a whole another level of terror right there.
Well,
But
and another even better example, if we're talking DARPA, I would say, and Minority Report, which I think is also early 2000s, but they had these
mhm.
little devices that would like run under doorways and then jump up on your face and grip your head and scan your eyeballs to make sure that you were who you said you were, right? Like this, which is a
Mhm.
little bit like hyperbolic just for the sake of being cinematic, right? But this really is something that would be square in DARPA's corner. In fact, DARPA's got a number of projects that are kind of inspired like that. And there's so much of everything that we do that's just inspired by nature. So some of the like
Mhm.
the really creepy stuff that comes up, you've seen the dog from I think Boston Mechanics or
Oh
whatever the
yeah.
company is, that's sort of
Yeah.
a side project also of DARPA, where you like they kick them. Originally, that was the only thing. They'd kick this thing and you feel bad for it, but it always gains it. And now they've got, guns and lasers and all sorts of stuff strapped to the back of these things. But those ones are terrifying, right? If you just imagine like a
Mhm.
whole warehouse of them waking up and just like rushing into a city and doing whatever. But what's even scarier to me, and it's more similar to that Minority Report, like little spider eye machine, is that DARPA has these robot cockroaches. They've got like little robot wasps and mosquitoes and stuff, but the cockroaches are basically made to just be able to squeeze through any little gap, and they've just got sensors and cameras and microphones and everything around them. But I mean, if this is what's popular now, and we're 30 years behind that, who's to say those little cockroaches can't have a whole arsenal of like cool little gadgets and like weapons of their own,
Mhm.
right? Like that the cockroaches themselves could eventually be the real weapons of war. And now all of a sudden it starts getting way harder and harder, especially if your weapons can blend in with nature. Like you could do straight up
Yeah.
covert attacks and just be like, oh, what a weird, swarm of Africanized killer bees that just swept through this town and then they're gone. No trace of them. That's weird.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that, right now, the state of the world, it seems like we're on the brink of World War III. I hope I'm wrong, but I think that if World War does break out, we're going to start seeing a lot more of this stuff actually, in real life. And people are going to be like, whoa, what is this? And I'm going to be like, yeah, that's DARPA. You should have been paying attention. This is, I think we're going to start seeing a lot of this stuff being used in real life, which is scary. But not to get too far off topic. So with DARPA, they're the R&D of the military. What is their connection to Taylor Swift,
Well,
America's sweetheart?
So I've got a personal connection to this one, but let me squeeze in one other DARPA program here, which I think is a nice bridge between these two topics. So
Yeah.
there's also something DARPA's got called jazz robots. And what the jazz robots are is that we've already got AI, and I don't have to explain how AI necessarily works, kind of out of scope for this. But
Yeah.
one of the things they've been doing is they've been using AI to learn from how jazz composition is made. And then they're using that improvisational jazz AI learnings and giving it to robots so that they can have a more novel approach to complex decision making. So you've
Wow.
literally got DARPA training machines of death. Like I would say that the end result of anything that DARPA really does, even all like the cool little things that like a self-repairing house and all that, the when I was in the Air Force, right, in training, one of the first things that they started drilling in my head was that what we do is we kill people and we break their things. Like those are our real jobs. So I don't care what any video you saw or like movie that got you here. Your two jobs are to kill people and break their things. It's kind of the role of it, right? So DARPA, I assume, is just another sort of extension of that. So they're literally, using jazz music in order to create killer robots that are more efficient. That's the way that I reduce that down. So with that said, it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that music is actually being used by DARPA. Like DARPA is developing music that has a weaponized result as the main outcome of that, right? So with that in mind, here's the personal connection. Is that as soon as I joined the military, again, this is 2001 that I joined, and then I think sometime in 2002 when I got to my main duty station, which was Security Hill, that was right outside Lackland Air Force. This is another huge Air Force base where everyone goes through for training. And I think that it's notable because I think Paris Island is one of the places that like Marines go, but Army, I believe, has a whole bunch of different places you can go for training. So the Air Force is unique in that everyone that has ever gone through the Air Force in the United States has gone through Lackland Air Force Base for training, unless they were like CIA sheep dipped or something and came through back door. But everyone gets funneled through Lackland Air Force. So with that in mind, I remember in 2002, I'm not in training, I'm at my regular job, and there's a whole bunch of BXs all over the base. And the BX is essentially like some cases they're like a huge Walmart. So imagine like the combination of a super Walmart and a Home Depot combined. That would be something that will be on base. And then there's also mini versions of that would be like little corner stores, like 7-Elevens and stuff all over base. And those are all part of this BX system. It's just like military version of allowing soldiers to get discounts, not having to leave base and all that. So in a few of these, but in these like little 7-Eleven versions that you would just find scattered around base if you needed to get quick groceries, you want to rent a video, they still had like DVD rental places and stuff. In all of those on base in the various places, not just Lackland and on Security Hill, but elsewhere, all around that central Texas, you would go in there. They don't sell music, right? It would be weird for them to like also have albums just randomly. But
Hmm.
I remember for a stretch of about a year, they were stocked with all these Taylor Swift albums. And it's 2002. No one really even
Hmm.
knows who she is. I had to look it up. Even if you looked at the discography, it seems like it would only start around 2006 unless you get into like the weird home pressed CDs. And that's exactly what I guess I was looking at the time. And the reason it made such an impression on me, not only am I already looking into DARPA, and I've already kind of got like I'm in the military. I didn't consider it conspiracy to be interested in the things that I knew people were working on. And I'm just remember looking at all these N aisles full of these weird Taylor Swift CDs, some like little girl that sings country music, I guess, at that point. And like, how did she get the deal? How do you get a distribution deal to get your music stocked in military bases that normally you would have to be going through some of the main music distributors? And this was not that because they didn't even stock it. And not only that, but she wasn't necessarily from Texas. I think she came from Tennessee and kind of grew out from there
Hmm.
and ended up moving to Nashville. And that kind of became the base of operations. So just the fact that there was a line of distribution for Taylor Swift CDs in 2002, exclusively in places where there was no other music on military bases, my brain was already going at that point. I had never even heard of her. I didn't know it. Like, obviously, she hadn't blown up yet, and I was already like, "There's something weird going on here." So that's where it all starts.
All right, then. Did you happen to listen to the CD?
No, no, definitely not. I mean, I just remember like, why is there a 12-year-old girl singing country music on a CD that looks like someone printed it out on an inkjet and burnt it and then just stocked it? But they had lots of them. So it was because at the same time too, I was moonlighting in the military, working at a recording studio, and I kind of knew what it took for. I was also I had like 4 jobs while I was in the military. I was also regional manager for distribution for Sam Goody Music Land. So if you wanted to get any of your music distributed to Sam Goody or Music Land stores, and you were in Central Texas, you'd have to go through me. So I knew the whole flow, and I knew how much effort it took and the price and how to, people taking their ideas and getting it into the system. And this was like these Taylor Swift CDs, again, they stuck out because they circumvented all that. They weren't in music stores. So that begins all of this. And I guess to bridge it to modern day Taylor Swift DARPA connections, but if you imagine that they already somebody, I don't know if it was military looking for something or Taylor Swift and her family found a good in and was like, let's target military. But at some point they would naturally fuse if they were being highly targeted like that. And Taylor Swift seems like she's got major political influence. Like she's got political capital to spend and she's been saving it up and it's been gaining interest and she's got a legit army that could rival. Like if she were to weaponize and say, all right, Swifties, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I need you all to rise up. I need you all to like start breaking things and like, you know what I mean? Like that would
Yeah.
have a non-zero effect on at least in America, maybe even worldwide. There'd be a few events right out of that. So I feel that DARPA would be silly to not at least recognize that there is a way that they could weaponize whatever the hell Taylor Swift's been harvesting over the last 2 decades.
So basically, you think that Taylor Swift is some sort of DARPA plant to influence the American masses?
I think that it's a I have to pull up an example of like MK Ultra, right? MK Ultra
All right.
was the mind control program of the 40s, 50s, 60s. And the way that sometimes it can come across if you're watching like a movie or you're reading a conspiracy theory about it, it's almost that all these evil CIA scientists and doctors got together in a room and they were like, here's what we should do. We're gonna inject people with a bunch of drugs and then torture them and see if we can get information and maybe program them to do stuff. I don't think it was that. I think it was almost the opposite, where they found out other people were doing research and someone's like, oh, we could totally use that. Like we could turn that into a weapon. Like whatever version of it that they're doing hypnotic suggestion to have someone get over trauma. They're like, no, 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 no. Like you don't need to get over trauma. We'll just use that exact mechanism to have you kill somebody. And I think that that's kind of where the connection would be here, where the military, and I'm using DARPA because it is like the public facing branch. So it's almost like when I say DARPA, it's like that's the front door that you would open to get into all the real things that are in there. And I'll get into some of these, like InQtel, which is the CIA's venture capital arm. That's kind of like a DARPA, but a little bit more B2B. But I think that DARPA being that front facing door that anyone would like knock 3 times and get into, that this would be the mechanism to say, hey, there's this certain movement, like we want to influence societies. That's one of the biggest things that you can do for military protection. Like that's the best offense and defense is to have this like cultural backing. So unequivocally, Taylor Swift has that cultural political capital, right? Like she could sway. I would argue that she could potentially sway an election. I don't know if.
Spoiler alert, she did not sway the election. So this audio was recorded last year. And if you remember, Taylor Swift was one of the first big celebrities who endorsed Kamala Harris. And as we can see right now in 2025, Donald Trump is unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, but in my perspective, I say unfortunately, is back in the White House. So Taylor Swift did not sway the election. You failed, DARPA. You let us all down. All right, back to the show.
I don't even know if I trust elections to begin with, but I
Yeah,
think that she could actually be like, look, this is important, more than the P. Diddy rock the vote thing, right? Vote or die.
yeah.
I think Taylor Swift could, and she kind of dips her toe into that. I think for the longest time she remained apolitical, but now it's starting to become a little bit like she's starting to show at least who she's not in favor of versus outright saying, go and vote for this particular person. And that amount of political capital can ultimately be weaponized. The fact that she was somehow being marketed directly to the military for the last 20 plus years, I think both of those things make this perfect storm. It's almost like, the CIA or DARPA or fill in the blank, InQtel would be silly to not want to invest and see where this thing goes. The same way that MK Ultra, they'd sit back and see some scientist doing like psychic driving, where this guy, Ewan Cameron, was recording people's voices on loops and playing it for them for months on end. And that would actually change their behavior. For the military to be like, oh, we can totally use that to make a super soldier. That doesn't have to be therapy.
All right, so you mentioned MK Ultra. Has there ever been anything that you've heard about the military or MK Ultra or DARPA doing something similar with entertainment to influence the masses?
There's a huge link between the music industry and the intelligence agencies, and especially when it comes to MK Ultra, technically it's a CIA thing, but the CIA is only supposed to operate in international affairs and not domestic. Domestic's supposed to be for FBI. So usually MK Ultra is a good uh it's a good sort of litmus test to show like no, like it happens everywhere. Like the CIA operates domestically, and when they operate domestically, there is some implied sort of cohesion with other agencies, DEA, ATF, FBI, all the alphabet soup, three-letter agencies. So all of those combined, I think that you can see that the intelligence connection and all of the rock stars that kind of were coming out of Haight Ashbury, that and Laurel Canyon, even right, all these connections between who ends up shaping popular culture of the 50s, 60s, 70s plus and their deep connections to have a military. I'll give one practical example that's one of my favorites, but the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which is essentially what got us into another war, right? But I believe it was
Mhm.
Vietnam War. It might be in Korean. I think it was Vietnam War. But the Gulf of Tonkin incident has been cited as a false flag, where we intentionally made it look like we were getting attacked by a foreign power just so that we had justification to start in military engagement over there. Otherwise, it'd be a war crime to start the military engagement. Well, the guy that ran that ship was Jim Morrison's dad.
Hmm.
That's one of like the wildest connections ever. That not only was he a high-ranking military officer, but that he was also directly involved in these false flags. And then Jim Morrison's impact on pop culture seems like it would be hard to be understated, even if the Doors aren't as popular now as they were, a generation or two ago. But I think that, everyone's heard a Doors song. It's influenced your favorite songwriters and actors and writers and everyone across the board. So to have these deep connections, there's similar connections with a lot of other artists out there. I'll give a really good counterpoint to this too, just so it doesn't seem like I'm rambling and like paranoid schizophrenic entirely. And it's that
Mhm.
when the country is at a world war, a lot of people end up going into the military, especially if there's a freaking draft going on, right?
Mhm.
So it's not like someone's parents being in the military and them being in entertainment, especially in that time period, would be a complete anomaly, but it does become an anomaly when it's like intelligence and very specific, like false flag type operations like that.
Yeah, I think the artist Katy Perry, I think one of her parents was involved in intelligence or something like that. And then the actor Woody Harrelson, I think his father, they say his father has some connections to intelligence. I haven't delved too deep into that, but they said that his father may have killed Kennedy.
Yeah, I've seen that theory before. I've gone really deep in the JFK assassination theories, and one of
Yeah.
those is that Woody Harrelson's dad was one of the three tramps that was like hidden on the grassy knoll, and that maybe he took a shot. So
Huh.
yeah, the connection specifically Laurel Canyon and Haight Ashbury, if anyone's interested in going down these individual rabbit holes, and then it also branches directly into Hollywood. A lot of this starts dovetailing into the Manson murders and Roman Polanski, and then you follow Roman Polanski's network. It
Mhm.
starts to sprawl out and get really crazy. It connects to like Hugh Hefner. So like, but these are it's hard for me to distinguish the music industry from Hollywood just because the two seem to feed off of each other. Like once you get big enough as a music star, you'll start seeing them show up in movies and TV. Lady Gaga, right? She starts in American Horror Story, and then she's in the Joker movie. So there's this definite revolving door. It's almost identical to the revolving door that exists between, say, pharmaceutical or regulation companies and government, where you just hop out of one and jump into the other one and then jump back into the other one. So I feel that that's sort of this thing that's been created by intelligence agencies, like just that premise of that revolving door. Because even if you look at secret societies, someone's like, oh, the Epstein network or some kind of hip hop Illuminati or whatever, when you say secret society in that regard, you're just talking about an intelligence agency. That's all it is. The OG Bavarian Illuminati or like the old Freemasons, if you go back into 17th century, like the original versions or Knights Templar, all that, it was just networking, right? And
Mhm.
intelligence agencies. It was keeping knowledge to yourself and only giving it to others and being able to control that knowledge. So it's hard for me to tell a difference between actual intelligence agencies and Hollywood and music industry.
Do you think that there was a connection between intelligence and Diddy? You know, the whole Diddy thing right now, it looks like he was doing an Epstein, you know, recording people uh in sexual acts and I
A
guess
hundred percent.
blackmail.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
100%. Just because when you get to the level that I guess he got to, money stops being your what you use to reflect the power that you got, right? Like you got so much money that you could just spend it indefinitely forever, unless you go like all Nicolas Cage and start buying castles and dinosaur bones and like getting crazy with it, right? But if you could just
Mhm.
sit there and make it so you and no one in your family for multiple generations would ever really have to work again, then money stops being the thing that gives you more and more power. It just becomes redundant at a certain point. So at that point, I think that his power ended up becoming that he's got access to all these high profile people, and he probably ends up getting dirt on a lot of them, especially if they've got these like freak off things going. So yeah, the perfect analogy would just be a hip hop Jeffrey Epstein. And I mean, even their islands were somewhat close together. Like it might have just been like if you were to make it big and you move into like a downtown, or like a Beverly Hills sort of area where everyone else around you also lives on mountaintops and stuff, right? I think that's kind of what it is. You move in next door, you get the island next door, and it's just like you're sort of in the same clique, just adjacent from each other.
So, what do you think the fallout from this is going to be? Do you think like a lot of people are going to lose their careers? Do you think it's nothing's going to come out? Do you think Diddy's going to get killed, which is what I think? Or what do you think about the outcome of all this?
Yeah, I mean, I would say look at the most two recent examples of this, which would be Epstein, who is no longer with us, maybe, right? I don't even know what to think about that, but uh, and then the one before that, which was the start of the whole Me Too movement, was Weinstein, right?
Mm, yeah, Weinstein. Yeah.
And I think that if you go with those two examples and say, okay, what happened in those cases? In Weinstein's case, it was that he went down and then the Me Too movement ran its course for about a year and a half, 2 years, for being generous with it. And then that kind of came to an end. And then the Epstein thing started. He dies. Ghislaine is still in jail, right? So that's potentially
Mhm.
ongoing. But in both of those cases, and if we start with Weinstein, Weinstein couldn't have done all of that 100% by himself. He had to have people that were funneling those to him. He had to have a wide network of people that knew what he was doing and then didn't tell anyone about it. And definitely, if he saw some new starlet, going up to the room, no one was like, "Hey, by the way, this is what happens up there." Maybe they did. Maybe everyone just went along with it, right? But the end
Mhm.
result is that he got taken down, and he was the ultimate scapegoat, and the whole country got to go through this like cathartic release. It was like, oh, thank God, that guy's out of Hollywood. We can wash our hands of that whole mess. Thank God no one else is doing that. We got the one guy that was doing it, and everyone else that was involved, they're probably breathing a sigh of relief too, and no one will ever fill that spot. And then the same thing happens with Epstein, but Epstein takes it to a slightly higher level where the black book and all the names and all the people that like been to and from the island, all the Johns, right? What
Mhm.
happened to all of them, right? No one's been prosecuted for any of that too. So Epstein again, he gets to play this role of a scapegoat where he's publicly sacrificed in a literal sense in this case, right? He gets taken out non-judiciously, and that becomes, thank God, the one guy on the whole planet that was doing this, they finally got rid of him. And now when it's his turn coming up, whether or not he survives it, he still is going to de facto play the role of this sacrificial lamb, where the rest of the world can collectively say, all right, now we've rooted it out of the music industry, at least out of the hip hop world. No one else is doing this, thank God. And don't worry about who came to all the parties and facilitated and like made use of all of this. Don't worry about all that. Because what happens is that when Weinstein gets taken down, when Epstein gets taken down, when Diddy gets taken down, they run in and they take the Rolodex and they take the computers and the cell phones and the servers, and now they've got all the juice, right? So it's just a transfer.
Mhm.
It's like the bank robber forcing you to go to the ATM and just drain all your savings and give it over to them, and then they just pop you and then you're gone. That's kind of what happens here. Like the three-letter agencies, they go in, they drain the bank account, they take all the assets, and then it doesn't really matter what happens to you after that because all your power is gone. Especially this happening in public. Like he might as well, like the character assassination sometimes is just as powerful as like the literal assassination.
Yeah. So, what do you think the intelligence agencies do with this, like media? Do you think that they just like, let's say they have something on Jay-Z? Do they go to Jay-Z and say, "Hey, we have you engaging in this sexual act with another man. We need you to speak out on this issue, or we need you to do this and that, or are they doing something else?" Because I'm trying to understand, what did they do with the blackmail videos?
You
Like, how
know
did
that
they?
this might be a random tangent, but there was like this viral story, I want to say it was like 10 years ago, but it was this guy that started on Craigslist, and he like, I'm gonna make some of this up just to convey the point, but he started with like a Matchbox car, but he trades the Matchbox car in for like a VCR, and then he trades the VCR in, and he keeps trading up until allegedly he gets a car, and then he starts trading from there. He gets a house, and he shows this whole journey of like, I just started with a stupid little toy that was worth like 20 cents, and just through trading up constantly. And I kind of think ideally, that's what the three-letter agencies would be doing. They would be going in and seeing like, yo, Hova, look at what we got, man. Remember this party? Remember this freak off? Well, we got it on tape, and we got the after party on tape. And he's like, damn, the after party too. They're like, yeah, bro, like 360 degrees, surround sound, everything. Like we got it. Now it becomes, now tell us what you can give us that's better than what we've got already. And I think that that's kind of the game. I mean, it's the oldest trope in a lot of these like police detective movies and TV shows, right? Where they get the low level guy, and there's always a high level guy, right? I don't think that Jay-Z is literally running the world. I think he's up there, right? But I don't think he's running the entire industry. But he probably knows who runs the industry, or he knows other people that are at his level that are not public facing. And if you're a three-letter agency, there's different amounts of value that you would assign to someone that has public capital, you know what I mean? That like Jay-Z, that could move the needle on certain issues or whatever they would need, versus someone that has just as much power as Jay-Z, but can also be anonymous, that like can make those moves from behind the scenes and have influence on a different demographic. Because Jay-Z, his influence is not just behind the scenes, it's obviously out, public facing, all the fans. Then you got people that don't have the fan networks, or their fans are other people that are behind the scenes. So I would almost imagine that trading Jay-Z for one of those behind the scenes power player, that would be like getting your pawn to the other side of the board and being like, all right, queen me. So that's kind of what some of these happen with. And I would imagine that Puff Daddy, he's kind of the guy that's got the whole chessboard, right? So if the three-letter agency can come in, like they can just keep going, queen me, queen me, queen me. They got a board full of like 20 queens at a certain point.
Do you think maybe there's some politicians who are wrapped up in all this?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is a revolving door, and I think more so than ever, there's this trend of that becoming an entertainer or leveraging entertainers liking you. That's a very real political capital type thing, right? Like an example here is that I guess Trump has been wanting to court rappers for a while, but he gets like Lil Pump and he gets like, some very specific like genres of rappers. He gets
Yeah.
I can't remember who else he got out.
There's
I know
this one dude.
he got Aesop Rocky out, but I don't think Aesop necessarily started endorsing him over and over. But he got a few other people out
Yeah.
too that kind of got his
Kodak
capital,
Black.
right?
Yeah, there's a rapper
Kodak
named
Black, yeah, Kodak Black
Yeah.
is one. I don't think that Kodak Black's been going on like Donald Trump tours either. But
Yeah.
it's just investments that he's making into like the cultural capital. And on the other side, you've got bands that'll like come out and they'll publicly be like, you're not allowed to use our music, therefore aligning themselves with whoever they're not saying. It's a game of chess in a lot of ways. But the Democratic Party definitely seems like they've got Hollywood and the music industry on their side, because they're not dumb. They realize that probably holds just as much sway, maybe more so than any advertising campaign that they can launch and go viral with. Them just having some really popular actors and musicians, and the people that you maybe reflect as like your role models, right? For a lot of people, heroes and role models are like, oh, I like how this person is in this TV show or whatever. So now if all those people have a certain political swing, yeah. So I would almost say that the entertainment industry is maybe more important than having any sort of legal standing or like a military record or any of that. If you truly had a candidate and all of the actors and Hollywood people were like, this is the one, this is the guy, that would be better than being like, I went to Yale, I've got a degree from Harvard Law School or whatever. I think that would pale in comparison. So yeah, there's direct cooperation with this. And then just like Epstein, right? The way that you would keep building that political capital is that you start rubbing shoulders and elbows with other people that are high level politicians and have got some of that sway. So Puff Daddy hitting the level where money is no longer the thing that he communicates with. That's the next obvious step, is that you start aligning yourself and getting the key to the city and start, getting people on speed dial that are mayors of certain areas. Or, I mean, I would assume that he probably knew the leaders of a bunch of small countries as well, right?
Recently, the mayor of New York, he's been indicted by the FBI or whoever for, I don't know, he was like, you heard about this, Eric Adams? Have you
I only heard
it?
about it through like a Saturday Night Live episode where they were making fun of him.
Yeah, supposedly he was doing some work for some foreign governments like Turkey, like setting up some kind of real estate deals or something and taking money from them. But I think it's interesting that he got indicted at the same time that Diddy went down. And I think like a couple of weeks before, Eric Adams had gave Diddy the key to the city. So part of me wonders if maybe the reason they were able to take Eric Adams down is because there's a connection between him and Diddy.
And that also shows a power dynamic too, though, right? Where like they get Diddy and they can only go up from there. But at this and Diddy, he's kind of superseded and transcended money as his capital. But then you've got someone that's in government, but they're chasing more money and getting themselves in trouble over it, showing that
Mhm.
almost like that. That's to me, that's concrete evidence, right, of how much more powerful Diddy is than the mayor of New York, because Diddy's not scrambling doing deals with Turkey in order to make some
Yeah.
extra bucks. He's probably got passive income that would dwarf any sort of like backroom deals that this guy's doing that's going to get himself in legal trouble.
Yeah, it's interesting, man. So recently, Taylor Swift, she endorsed Kamala Harris. I know you were talking about how DARPA could use celebrities to influence people. Do you think that endorsement is going to have like a big impact on Kamala's campaign?
So I'm gonna just put my bias on my sleeve here.
Yeah,
And maybe paints me as an extremist in a way, but I really have zero confidence in elections anyways. I think that the results of the elections just have to somewhat match what people perceive the public sentiment to be.
yeah,
So I think if anything, again, I would invert the equation. I don't think it's that Taylor Swift drums up support for Kamala Harris, therefore she gets more votes, therefore she wins. I think you could just as easily describe it as Kamala Harris is the one that's been pre-selected to win, and now you just like retroactively fit all the other pieces around that, including, well, of course she won. Taylor Swift endorsed her. Of course she won. Hollywood endorsed her. Like you put all these extra little hats and like, awards and bells and whistles on top of it to sell that, the result that was kind of predetermined. That's kind of where my brain goes. If you're asking me specifically of how like Taylor Swift does this, yeah, I don't think Taylor Swift brings the votes. Taylor Swift justifies the fact that it seems like she won, so then she won. And I also think that it's almost, I mean, it's obviously just symbolic because who really thinks that Taylor Swift was going to vote for Trump? And I guess it's a good
true.
question to ask though, because when Trump first ran earlier, I think before he actually made the presidency, there was speculation of like, well, maybe Taylor Swift hasn't come out politically because she's afraid that everyone's going to find out she's a Trumper or something. So like her hand was almost forced to make a pick. And I mean, again, in my conspiratorial brain, how genius would it have been though if those accusations originated from like the Democratic Party, where they knew that
Mm,
she was like, I just want to be apolitical, and they start planting stories and planting seeds of people like, is she going to vote for Trump? Is she secretly vote? And now all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, now I have to come out and say something about this. So that I think that more accurately represents how I imagine intelligence agencies and musicians interacting. I don't think it's like they knock on the door, hey, nice to meet you, I'm CIA, would you like to take this money, would you like look at this. I think it's just like moving around pieces on a chessboard, and someone just sees an opportunity and they report it to their supervisor. They're like, look, this is a good time to invest in this particular stock, that stock being maybe trashing Taylor Swift in the public media so that she has to take a side.
Speaking of planning stories, recently there was this whole story about the Haitian migrants in Springfield, Ohio, eating cats and dogs.
Right.
And, Donald Trump said it at the presidential debate. Part of me wonders what if the Democratic Party planted that story in the media so that it would get to Trump, and then Trump would actually like say it during a debate, making him look bad, you know?
I've heard the opposite of this one too, where that Trump, and I'm not going to plant a flag on either of these sides. They're just really interesting takes. I think that's fascinating take that they plant this story and it's like the bait, and he's like, oh my God, he took the bait. He made himself look like an idiot. But there's also a line of thinking that he knew that that was hyperbole, right? Of like all the Haitians are just eating cats and dogs. They're going to steal your pet and they're going to eat it, right? That's hyperbole. But what it forces people to do is that now they're asking questions and they're hounding the mayor, and they're like, and they had to come out with like a
Mm,
public response and everything. And even if they come out and they're like, look, there's no basis in fact for this. We don't have any instances of anyone reporting this to the police, just like someone at a bar said it or someone on TV. But it also shines a light on that there is a abnormal immigration situation in this particular area where they have a much higher level of say like non-assimilated immigrants living in a community that's starting to displace culture and jobs and everything. So now you've got like an actual complicated topic, right? It's not complicated to say Haitians are eating cats and dogs. Like that's the most like you can visualize it and you're like, "Oh my God, that's horrible." You've got a visceral reaction. That's the type of thing that works on a huge stage like a freaking debate where you've got people of all walks of life and mental capabilities and political interests. You say that, it cuts through all the complexities of a more detailed conversation like, "Hey, let's talk about this influx of immigrants in specific communities and how that might be offsetting, like that entire community." That's a much more boring conversation than like they're eating your cats, right? So I
Yeah, I
think
see
that
what you're saying.
there's an angle where it's smart to be dumb, right? It's like you say the dumb thing so that people start making fun of you. Can you believe he said this? Look what he said. And then it's like, well, wait a minute. If you look into this, isn't this part of it true? So either way, it could be. I think it's genius on someone's part. I don't know who's the smart one here.
I see what you're saying. So let me ask you this. So we talked about DARPA and we talked about like the entertainment industry and how the entertainment industry could be using, I mean, how DARPA could be using the entertainment industry to influence people with these celebrities. And you talked about MK Ultra. Do we have any kind of evidence of them using like celebrities to get the common people to do things that the military wants them to do?
Yeah,
If
I
you
mean,
understand the question.
100%. I mean, so some of
Yeah.
these, because these are like the proven instances, they're not going to be as salacious as like MK Ultra documents that only came out after they were discovered and like released to the public. But
Mhm.
the ways that we already know that this is happening, there is a CIA and DARPA and DoD. They all have their own what they call liaison offices. So, for example, CIA has a liaison office with the entertainment industry and they've directly collaborated on Zero Dark 30 and Argo. And Argo in particular is a great example of the CIA trying to shape a narrative over a very specific event. But what's even like more fascinating to me is that we've gone so far to where when MK Ultra papers came out, this is the church hearings in the 1970s, I think. When those came out, it was groundbreaking. It was blowing people's minds. They couldn't believe the amount of things that the three-letter agencies were doing domestically and the scope and just like what their plans were. It's like, wait a minute, we're not even like, how does this help us, defeat the next world war? Like, this seems like it has nothing to do with any of this. So it was secret for so long and people were suspicious of it. But then a couple generations pass, and at least growing up in the 80s and 90s, I remember this feeling of like conspiracy theories were almost ubiquitous. You would watch any cartoon show or TV, and if someone had glasses and like an earpiece in and they talked on the earpiece and they were like, and you couldn't hear what they were saying, but they kind of like mumbled, you just knew like, oh, they're the Men in Black. They're like these dark operative military quasi, politics guys. And it didn't have to be explained. It was almost accepted as second nature that this element exists in reality. It's not conspiracy, it's not conjecture. So that was always being like hiding things and whispering and like being in the secrets. But now when you talk about Zero Dark 30 and Argo, the movies themselves will brag, they'll promote, they'll be like, we got the CIA to collaborate with us on this script. We had advisors on set the entire time on exactly how the CIA would do this. So it almost becomes a selling point. So a couple generations ago, these connections would be kind of hidden. Like they would want to make sure that people didn't know, like, oh, we don't want, anyone to know that the military is collaborating with Hollywood. So that's kind of been inverted. You've got the DoD in particular, Top Gun, Transformers, and I think one of the better examples would be Iron Man. So DARPA in particularly, they did work on Edge of Tomorrow, which was the one with Tom Cruise, and it's kind of like Groundhog's Day, where he keeps like reliving and having to take down this big neural network of like mech monsters, like giant versions of those Minority Report spider things, right? That one and an
Yeah.
Iron Man. So these are another example where DARPA gets to get some cool credits where it's like, hey kids, you don't really hate DARPA, do you? You don't hate us. We helped make Iron Man. You know what I mean? And then Iron Man gets to say, oh, like this isn't just comics anymore. Like we got actual DARPA, liaisons to help consult on exactly how this tech might feasibly work and stuff. So again, this is a complete fusing where both sides are embracing, they're advertising, it's not secret. So there has to also be the secret versions of this, right? So I guess the point being that we went from a point of time when none of this was disclosed to now it's being disclosed and promoted. And I think that that's the misdirection magician technique where it's like, look at over here, I just pulled a rabbit out of a hat, not realizing that like he just stole your wallet with the other hand while you weren't looking or whatever.
Yeah, I read somewhere that if you're making a movie in Hollywood and it involves the military in any way, shape, or form, as long as you're portraying the American military in a positive light, then the American military will provide any resource you need for free. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I heard.
And it's not for
Yeah.
free. This is just again because the military operates way transcendent of money. Like they could, if they really
Hmm.
wanted to, they could just hit a print button and just be like, "Tell me when to stop." And it's just like, brrr, you know what I mean? Just prints money for
Hmm.
them. So they don't expend financial capital the same way that almost any other entity would. They're just trading influence and culture points. And a good example of this one is the movie Captain Marvel, the 2019 one that had Brie Larson, and it was like one of the first female
Duds.
hero centric, right?
Yeah.
This was a direct collaboration between Captain Marvel and the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Air Force because they were trying to see how like Top Gun too did this with the Navy, where
Mm.
enlistments spike. Top Gun movie comes out, people are joining the Navy because they're inspired and they want to be like Tom Cruise and they want to like just I guess get like a patriotic feeling. Maybe there's some subliminal messages implanted. I don't know. So I think that that's the same thing, but in Captain Marvel, the U.S. military specifically, the Air Force specifically, was targeting. We want to raise female enlistees. We want more women joining the Air Force. So they really pushed into having Air Force uniforms and kind of can like all of the powerful like female enlistees that were in this movie. It was all very highly calculated and cherry picked specifically to get more women to join the military. So I mean, these are
Mm.
very run of the mill, but very tangible and provable examples of how military and intelligence, CIA, DARPA, all of them working directly with certain movies. Black Hawk Down's another good one. The Recruit was another good one. There's one Long Road Home in 2017. This was intervened by DoD to make sure that, like you were just saying a second ago, to make sure that everything was kind of shown in like a positive light, right? Um,
Yeah.
Another one that I was mentioned before is that CIA's venture capital wing called InQtel, INQtel. They also invest in technology that ends up going into entertainment and CGI because CGI is also something that can be used like it can be used for entertainment, but if you plop
Yeah.
CGI into a video that you then send to your political adversaries, now all of a sudden it has been weaponized as an actual military tool.
Yeah. The whole CGI thing in I think that eventually it's going to get to the point where we're going to see things and we're not even going to be able to trust what we see, you know, because as of right now, you can look at something and tell that it's AI, but as time goes on, it's getting harder and harder. And eventually it's going to get to the point where you won't be able to tell unless you use some kind of software. And I think about what kind of advantage that would have to the military and the intelligence communities. They could plant fake evidence on somebody. Like, let's say there's somebody running for president they don't like maybe a third party candidate, or they could put a video out of him beating his wife and it looks real and people believe it, but it's fake. All sorts of things that they could do. So I could definitely see them, investing in CGI and things like that, and using that for nefarious motives. But something else I wanted to touch on. I know Kickstarter recently about the moon landing and how the moon landing was fake. And it's interesting that we're talking about intelligence and entertainment, and supposedly, I'm forgetting the name of the director, Kubrick.
Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah. So can you speak on that for a bit? And also, I did invest in your Kickstarter. I got the
Oh,
comic
thank you,
right
man.
here.
I
Hey,
hope
no
you loved it.
problem. I
I'm really
did.
proud of this one.
Yeah, it's a great comic, man. I'll also put the link to the Kickstarter in the show notes. Can you talk about that, the whole Stanley Kubrick moon landing connection?
Yeah. So the book is at nasacomic.com. It stands for Never a Straight Answer. The comic book does, but it's based on this premise that Stanley Kubrick was hired or forced by the CIA to direct the moon landings, in particular because we were in a sort of a space race with the Soviets, and the premise of the book kind of starts on a joke of that we hear that the Soviets are going to fake a moon landing. So the CIA is like, well, not if we fake it first. So now it's more of a space race on who can fake the moon landing first, as opposed to who could actually get to the moon first. So that's sort of like the nugget, and it started as just like a single little comic sketch, and it just bloomed into like a 40-page book. So I guess to give the most rudimentary, like the fundamentals of this theory, it was that in the movie Doctor Strangelove, Stanley Kubrick contacted, I think, the DoD, and he wanted to just he kind of wanted that liaison person that probably didn't exist at this point, because this was before they wanted anyone to know that the intelligence agencies were having any sort of direct influence over Hollywood, specifically because the CIA at this point was maintaining this facade for the next 2 decades that they didn't operate domestically. That anything they did, it was like preventing things from happening overseas. So Stanley Kubrick basically gets denied. They're like, no, we're not getting you any information for this. So he, being an absolute genius filmmaker that he is, he finds every single public article that had been published by the military on, I think, one of their bomber planes, and a whole bunch of other aspects of like how the plane was put together, what kind of instruments it was using. So for anyone else, right, a regular bumpkin person that goes and sees this movie, I don't think they would care if he ripped out like an Oldsmobile dash and just like made the set designers make it look like the inside of an airplane, right? But he actually was able to reconstruct with such accuracy what it looked like inside one of these at the time top secret bomber planes, that the military calls him in. They're like, who leaked it? Who told you, like how this was made? We explicitly did not give you permission for this. So how did you get it? And they were trying to find like a mole. And I'm paraphrasing a lot of this to simplify it, but he basically explains to them like, no, I pieced it together. And they realize that at that point, like, it's better to have this guy on our team than to not be playing ball. And also one of the scenes in Doctor Strangelove is when the guy actually rides the bomb as it's being dropped. There's this green screen effect. That's one of the earliest green screen compositing effects ever done. And it looked absolutely believable at that time because there was no other comparison. So again, the military is like, man, this guy can recreate reality and can, like he can put things together and make it look believable. So let's get him on the roster. That's the conspiracy angle of how this all started. They either approach him with dirt, which would probably be more in line with how the CIA usually operates, or they could have appealed to ego and finance, because Kubrick also at this point, he had worked on a few different movies where he didn't have absolute control from start to end. A lot that he kind of got tacked on afterwards, Spartacus being a good example of these, where Kirk Douglas brings him on after he gets rid of the old directors, so then he still doesn't necessarily have 100% say. So the most simplified conspiracy version of this, the military sees what Kubrick did in Doctor Strangelove, says, here's an offer you can't refuse, and ultimately he gets a blank check to work on any movie he wants, unlimited budget, unlimited resources, final say on all the cuts. I don't know how the military could necessarily make those types of promises, but that is the simplified version of how he gets his foot in the door. So the ultimate goal that they put him up to is to recreate what the Apollo 11 missions, or the entire Apollo missions, would look like. And he has this unique ability that he released 2001 Space Odyssey. So he shows the public, here's what space would look like, here's what zero gravity might look like, here's what the technology looks like. So who better than the hire the guy that just showed the entire world, here's what space looks like, to do the space mission, and then he can just make it match what's already been set up as their expectations in their head, so that the two things meet each other perfectly. And it not only can it fill his ego of like, I have this movie that was so accurate, but also that no one else is like, wait a minute, that's either Kubrick was wrong, or like, why does that footage look a little bit weird? Someone explain the difference. So to just smooth all that over, that was part of the premise. So yeah, that's the smallest nutshell that I think I can put the whole conspiracy theory into.
2001: A Space Odyssey came out before the moon landing.
2000 Space Odyssey was already in the works. The moon landing was 1969, I believe.
Gotcha.
The actual Apollo mission had been going on for much longer, the NASA Apollo mission, because their very first one was an absolute tragedy. There was actually a movie that came out this year called Fly Me to the Moon that had Scarlett Johansson in it. And they kind of run this exact same premise where they're shooting the moon landings on a soundstage because they can't afford for, if anything goes wrong, they would never recover from it. The space programs would all basically be canceled. This is a running theme. There was also a movie called Capricorn 1 that O.J. Simpson was in that has the same exact premise, that the American people are sick of hearing about all these failed launches and fatalities and all these tax dollars. So yeah, so that's basically that original premise, was that they were doing it as a backup plan, but the Apollo mission had been going on for years prior to this.
So here's my question about the whole moon landing being fake. And honestly, I know this whole topic, you could do a whole podcast series about this, but my question is this, right? If it was faked, so you're saying that we did go, but what we saw was faked, just so that if something went wrong, they had something to show us? Are you saying we didn't go at all, period?
I don't know where I land on this. I think that if you put my feet to the fire, I would say that yeah, they had a backup plan. Why wouldn't they? I would almost spin it around and like answer question with a question in an annoying way, but
Yeah.
if you were the military, you were the space program, let's just assume that it was a real program and they really put all this money and resources and effort into it. Why wouldn't you spend another $5 to have like a really great plan B and plan C, just in case, let's say they landed on the moon, but the signal goes out, and like, who's going to believe you to be like, look, just trust us. They're there. We don't got the footage, but they're definitely there. You know what I mean? It would be
gotcha.
a complete waste of all that time. People would be, completely let down from it. So it would seem silly to not have that backup plan. So with that in mind, yeah, it seems 100% possible that they had that backup. And now we're just saying, well, would they have used that backup? And again, I would say, well, if you spent all the money and you spent the time doing it, you've got the backup for a reason. So yeah, they would use that backup. So I think that one of my rational versions of this conspiracy theory is that we did go to the moon because there are reflectors on the moon. The amateur hobbyists can see, they can, you can shine like lasers or whatever, but you can see with like a telescope. So these reflectors on the moon are there. So it seems that someone has been to the moon, but maybe something went wrong with the footage. And again, it would be different if there was the original footage and they were like, look, here it is for the public to analyze, and we've done dating, and here's all the proof. But every time you're like, okay, well, show us some of those original, like the original math, the original programs. How about that original footage? And when NASA's like, oh crap, the original footage, we didn't realize that anyone would want to see that again. We accidentally reused it when we were running low on tape. We just kind of recorded over it.
That's what gets me. That's what really made me start doubting, like learning that they recorded over mankind's supposed greatest achievement,
Well, there's a joke that I bring up in that comic where Kubrick is recording and the CIA handler comes in and he's like, they're just jumping around. Like, this doesn't this doesn't look like anything moon-like. And he's like, no, 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 you don't get it. We're going to slow the footage down. So you see them jumping around and acting silly, but when we slow it down, this is going to be what shows everyone they're in zero gravity. Look how long it takes for them to jump in the air and fall back down. It's really going to sell this effect. And imagine at this time when they're recording it, right? It's these huge movie cameras. There's no such thing as getting a movie and playing it at home. Like you don't have a VCR. Laser discs don't really exist. None of this technology necessarily exists in the 50s going on to the 60s where you're going to rewatch some theatrical release in your house. So the thinking then was like, in the book, the CIA handler is like, well, what if someone gets a hold of the footage and they just speed it back up again and play it at normal? And Kubrick's like, who's gonna have a way to watch this footage, let alone slow it down and play it forward and backward? Because again, the concept of like a personal computer and YouTube and having like MP4 files to send around just didn't exist. So maybe there was like a few little gaps in the system there where they didn't expect anyone to ever have technology to want to see it again. When this aired, there really wasn't this premise. They had reruns and stuff, but there wasn't really an idea of like a live event being recast over and over. So I don't think they expected anyone to be like, okay, show it again, let's see it every year. It was meant to be this live broadcast, one and done, and just be in the back of your memory. So the fact that the rest of the world didn't sort of follow in that line, it kind of created complications.
I see what you mean. All right, what do you think would happen if it came out that the moon landing was faked and nobody has been there? What do you think how society would react?
Well, I don't know. I kind of want to reject the premise just because the say nobody has been. I think the moon landing footage being faked, I think eventually seems like it's going to come out. I think even in the case of Fly Me to the Moon and Capricorn 1 and so many other. I mean, I watch a bunch of Disney films for this other podcast I do called Occult Disney, right? And there's anytime moon landing comes up, there's always a freaking joke in there about how we didn't go there or how it was faked or how it was done like a sound stage. It's become this ubiquitous joke that if someone mentions moon landings, it's almost already in your mind of like, oh, I've got a joke about it being fake, or I've seen this thing about it being fake. So that happens through enough extra generations. Now all of a sudden our kids are grandkids. If the military comes out and they're like, oh, by the way, the footage was faked, collectively everyone can be like, oh yeah, no, we knew. Like every single movie and TV show we've ever seen already kind of implies that it was fake. And it takes a lot of that sort of like shock value completely out. You know what I mean? So I feel that one is I almost feel like that one's gonna come. Like I would buy that as a Bitcoin, right? If there was like a coin based on the government actually having to admit, like, okay, the footage was faked. But I don't think not being there, only because so many other countries have also now made that claim, right? China, India. There's like now all of a sudden it almost becomes like a blackmail network, right? If the US was like, hey, we're thinking about telling our people that no one's ever been to the moon, India's like, wait, what? You know what I mean? Like, we're not ready for that. Like, we're still trying to build up our capital. We're still trying to get more money raised because we claim to have been to the moon. So,
I gotcha.
Officially, I do think that human beings have been to the moon, even though I'm a conspiracy theorist about it. Although, man, even the ones that I just mentioned, India's trips there and China's trips there, there was even one, I think, this year where they were supposed to have gone back to the moon and there wasn't HD footage streaming of it. It was like a really low resolution and the feed even went out a couple times. And the reason of why this feed went out, again, it was almost incredulous, is like, oh, we just recorded over it. We didn't know you wanted that. They basically said that the bandwidth that they had reserved ended up getting sold out, or like whatever satellite that they were using to bounce the stream off of didn't have enough bandwidth for them to open up an HD stream for it. So in lieu of that, they just let it be low quality and cut in and out before. It's like, okay, you guys could afford the mission to get there, but you couldn't afford to pay the streaming bill in order to stream back.
That is
It's just a nonstop list of like, but why this? Like, why if it's such this important endeavor, and there's public scrutiny that I would assume someone at NASA in one of these space programs is like, man, wouldn't it be great if we had just unequivocal evidence that would just prove beyond shadow of a doubt to everyone that this is a real mission, that you can't question it. And then someone's like, yeah, but let's just do a 3D rendering instead. You know what I mean? It's like, wait a minute, guys.
Oh man, that's wild. Well, hey, this has been a great discussion, man. I really learned a lot about DARPA and its connections to the entertainment industry. Before we end things, is there anything you want to let people know? I know we mentioned your Kickstarter, but also just where people can go to find you or anything like that.
Yeah, well, this whole episode kind of came up because I'm working on a series of trading cards that are all conspiracy themed, and you can find those at conspiracycards.com. And one of the cards that I was working on, it combines like 3 or 4 different conspiracies in one. It gets kind of deep, but the character name is LaVaylor Swift instead of Taylor Swift, because it's totally not her. It's a completely different person. They just look similar, but LaVaylor Swift, and she's holding a bat, and her shirt says Paranoid on it, but then her hat says DARPA, and that was where you're like, hey, what's the DARPA connection? So that's the DARPA connection. I would say, like, most people that even come across this card, they'll probably also be like, what the hell's DARPA doing on her hat, and not really get, but there's a deep story in it, as we've kind of explained here. But that's just one of the many different cards in this whole set. The reason her name is LaVaylor Swift, if anyone cares, is that the Church of Satan was created by a guy named Anton LaVey, and Anton LaVey had a daughter named Xena LaVey, and she now goes by Xena something else. But she looked remarkably like Taylor Swift, even though I think she's got like 20 years on her, maybe more.
Wow.
But this has come out a few times online. It's like one of these most niche conspiracies, but it's one of my favorites, is that Taylor Swift is Xena LaVey. That Taylor Swift is actually the daughter of this guy that founded the Church of Satan, that also has connections to intelligence and musicians and everything. Same time period. So anyways, yeah, that's why her name is LaVaylor Swift, because of that connection between Anton LaVey, Taylor Swift. But yeah, the rest of the set's got a whole bunch of other conspiracy theorist legends in it. It's also got some more normie friendly stuff. Got Bigfoot and Mothman, like reptilians, and all kinds of different cryptids as baseball players, along with cool little inserts and holograms and stickers and stuff. It's something I've been working on for a long time. I'm really, really happy with it. And it's been really popular, actually. It's been more popular than most of the comics that I release. So I'll probably keep making more of these for a while.
Awesome, man. Well, I'll definitely have to check it out, and I hope my audience does too. It's been great talking to you, man. And thank you for coming back on again.
Appreciate you. Always have a good time talking.
All right, you too, man.
That's a wrap for this episode of Bright Brainz, where curiosity meets conversation. If you enjoyed the ride, make sure to follow, rate, and review the show. It helps more minds find their way here. You can keep up with me on Facebook at Bright Brainz Podcast, on BlueSky at brightbrainzpod.bsky.social, and last but certainly not least, Instagram at bright_brains_podcast. And remember, that's Bright Brainz with a Z. So check me out for behind the scenes content, episode updates, and more thought-provoking discussions. Stay sharp, stay curious, and I'll catch you next time. Keep that brain bright.